Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's Generation Change, our monthly fireside chat with leaders, change makers, movers, and shakers around the world. Whether you are a regular or you just joined us for the first time, it's great to have you and thank you for tuning in. So my name is Anna Bach and I'm president of Generation Female. We are a nonprofit association that aims to empower and support all women leaders in their personal and professional capacities through the range of events and conferences, such as this one. We are also building a global community of women and allies in the hope of raising awareness and providing access to useful content and contacts. And if you are not already part of our network, you can easily sign up for free at www.generationfemale.net. This is our fourth episode of Generation Change. We started this monthly series late last year to shine a spotlight on inspiring role models from all over the world and tap their insight on their respective areas of expertise, as well as their personal experiences. We like to keep conversation intimate and interactive, as well as useful and relevant to those of you tuning in. So we always set aside time at the end of our conversation to answer your question. If you are joining the live stream on our website, please post your question in the comment section, which is exactly below. Or if you are watching via YouTube, you can also post your questions there. Today, we are very honored to be hosting Marlene Orozco, who is joining us all the way from California. Marlene is lead research analyst with the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and she's also CEO of Stratified, a research consulting firm. Hello, Marlene, and welcome to Generation Change.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So, well, to start us off, can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and maybe tell us a bit about the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, your research consulting firm, Stratified Insights?
Sure, absolutely. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And by way of introduction, I lead our research efforts at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, which we call SLAY for short. And SLAY has three arms to it: research, which is where I sit, and we also have an education program. This education program is conducted alongside our collaborators, the Latino Business Action Network. It happens twice a year at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where 75 to 80 Latino entrepreneurs from across the United States and Puerto Rico learn how to scale their business. To date, there are over 720 alumni of that program, and together this group of entrepreneurs generates a combined $4.0 billion in annual revenue. And the third part of our programming is around ecosystem development. So together, the research insights and the education program is really meant to bolster the business ecosystem for Latino entrepreneurs. As it relates to the education program, there's a mantra of that program, and it's to do business with each other and to get business for each other. So that's another way that the ecosystem is very vibrant, and we have our hand at developing that. And in my spare time, when I'm not working at SLAY, I am finishing my my PhD. And when I'm, not running around, taking care of my toddler, I also have started my own consulting company, Stratified Insights, which provides academic grade research solutions to organizations such as research planning and design, data collection and analysis, and reports and presentations to a variety of key stakeholders. And really, in all parts of my work, I'm very passionate about understanding various segments of the population and their pathways for social mobility. This means studying axes of inequality and the ways in which historically underserved and underrepresented communities can generate wealth. And so that's a little bit about kind of the culminating force of my work. And again, happy to be here today to talk about these various facets of my work with you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you a lot. I would like to talk about the Latino Entrepreneurship Forum, which actually you were recently part of, where you presented several interesting findings about the state of Latino entrepreneurship in the United States, including hard-hitting subjects such as the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on this business ecosystem and disproportionate access to financing. For those of us who didn't have a chance to attend this forum, I would like to raise a few of the more, I would say, pertinent topics and questions. So the first, of course, COVID-19. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the Latino community? And maybe you can share with us precise segments of Latino businesses in particular have experienced the biggest impact.
Sure. So, of course, we know that the world has been dealing with COVID-19 for roughly a year now. And in March of last year, just 2 weeks after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, at our research initiative, we launched a pulse survey to measure the impact of the pandemic on Latino businesses in the United States. And of course, we found that the impact was both immediate and largely negative for Latino business owners. Our research is based out of California. And of course, California was one of the first states in the United States to issue stay-at-home orders. And so again, there is a large Latino population in California, and many of those are not just essential workers, but also business owners. And so again, the impact was both immediate and largely negative. Subsequently, we've administered ongoing surveys to the same group of entrepreneurs to see how they have fared throughout the pandemic. So we surveyed them every 3 months or so. And we found, not surprisingly, that the effects of the pandemic are largely consistently negative, right? So there's been relief efforts, both at the federal government level and certainly lots of local and state initiatives happening, but this hasn't diminished the disparate impact as felt by Latino business owners. And we look at various segments that are largely impacted by COVID-19 across industries. And we know that Latinos are over-indexed in the restaurant industry. And the restaurant industry has been the hardest industry hit here in the United States. In June, at the height of the pandemic here, there were roughly 70% of all restaurants were reporting large negative impacts. And so again, Latinos over-indexed in the restaurant industry. We also saw disparate impacts in terms of Latinas. So Latina women entrepreneurs are more likely to close. And we also know that this temporary closure is likely to become permanent. So again, this is something that we need to continue to gauge in the future to see kind of what the ongoing effects are. We also know that there has been disparate impact in terms of being able to access relief aid. So here in the United States, kind of the seminal piece of relief support provided by the federal government was the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. And the first wave of the PPP was administered through large national banks. And our research has historically shown that Latinos are not connected to national banks. They're not successful in accessing capital from national banks relative to other funding sources. They are more successful in accessing funding through local and community banks. And really the relationships are key there. And so in the future iterations of the PPP, we saw that local and community banks, community development financial institutions were then folded into the mix because again, these are organizations and banks that are embedded within communities and have those relationships. And so those are some outlets for recovery, again, that we're keeping a strong pulse on to see as the pandemic endures.
Marlene, I think we had some problem, technical one, which was unmuted.
Okay, I'm here.
Yes, can you hear us? That's perfect.
Yes.
Let's call live.
That's right.
Okay, so just maybe you can repeat two last phrases.
Sure. We're continuing to measure the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses and really keeping our pulse on what the recovery efforts are looking like. again, the key piece of legislation has been the PPP, which is a loan program that is then has the opportunity to be converted into a grant, and entrepreneurs can be forgiven. And so, we're going to gauge whether Latino business owners are able to, in fact, be forgiven from this debt that they have now incurred in order to kind of recover from the impacts of the pandemic. And so this forgiveness is going to be key, in addition to continual support of the Latino business segment in the United States.
Yeah. And from your research, how is the experience of white business owners different from Latino business owners, both pre and post-pandemic?
So in June, we administered a survey to over 7,000 business owners, 3,500 of whom are Latino and 3,500 of whom are white. Now, historically, we have collected very detailed survey data of a large sample of Latino business owners, historically roughly 5,000. And with that, we've been able to look inward and slice and dice the data in a number of ways. We know that the Latino population is not homogenous. And so we look at the outcomes and experiences of immigrant Latinos, for instance, compared to native borns, or Latinas compared to men. And we decided to fold in this comparison group of white business owners to really benchmark the impact of the pandemic and future recovery efforts. And one of the biggest things that surfaced from that comparison was the experiences of accessing funding. Now, this is something that we've reported on in the past in terms of Latinos not being able to access national bank loans, with high success rates. And one of the things we were able to do with having this comparison group is conduct statistical models where we essentially compare similarly situated Latino business owners to their white business counterparts. So as we control for their business metrics like revenue growth, profitability, and the credit scores of the owner, we wanted to see what the outcomes were, or the chances of successfully securing financing from national banks. And so when we situate these two business owners with similar business metrics, we find that Latinos have their odds of being approved from national banks are 60% lower. So this is a huge gap that we have quantified. And of course, the next steps here, are to ask why. And we started to look at the ways in which national banks provide funding, and they base credit worthiness on the 5 C's of credit. Now, some of these are very self-explanatory. One of the C's being collateral, for instance. They want to see what assets the applicant has. But one of the C's that strikes me as particularly subjective is that of character. So, if you're a business owner that might have some qualities that somebody assessing you might not deem worthy, right? That is in fact a place where lots of implicit biases might creep in. And so, we hope that by measuring this gap and quantifying what the outcomes are, what the disparate outcomes are for Latino businesses relative to white business owners, that national banks and other stakeholders can begin to take action.
Yeah. So do you agree that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women, and especially Latinos and Latino business owners?
Absolutely. So prior to the pandemic, our work has largely been looking at the trends of growth. Latinos are starting businesses at a much faster rate than all other demographic groups. In the last 10 years alone, the number of Latino business owners in the United States has grown 34% compared to just 1% for all other business owners. And if you look underneath that, Latinas are in fact carrying much of that growth. And as we begin to see the impacts of the pandemic, they are in fact very disparate across gender, where I mentioned that Latinas are having to close their business at a much faster rate relative to their male counterparts and relative to other segments of the population. Part of this has to do with balancing some of the challenges, of course, of home life, particularly for Latinas who are mothers as well. Having to balance and run a business while also running your own school district at home can be very challenging. And so we're seeing that as a setback, and we're seeing that as a setback certainly for mothers in professional workplaces as well. And I will note that before the pandemic, we were seeing this increase in entrepreneurship from Latinas. And I conducted a series of interviews with Latina entrepreneurs, many of whom were in the professional service industries. And they would share with me their stories of facing promotion ceilings at work, or carrying the full weight of, their Latin American branch at their company and generating a ton of revenue for that company. And they were really empowered to go on and do that on their own. And so, with women having to leave the workforce for domestic responsibilities, again, this is going to be a setback, not just in the professional corporate world, but absolutely for those who are entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah. And from your point of view, what will it take for the Latino community to fully recover from the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a large question. And I think certainly opening up and getting to a place where we can be physically close again will be key. But before that happens, I think that there's a lot of groundwork that needs to happen. I think one of the things that the pandemic has revealed for many is, in fact, it has amplified many of the challenges that existed before the pandemic, such as accessing capital. I also think that there are things that entrepreneurs can be working on in terms of ensuring their viability for being able to access funding, right? We know, and our research lays this out, what the criteria that lenders are looking for, the materials that one needs to have prepared and ready. And even then, I will say that our research has revealed that women in particular, even though they have the materials and are ready, have a proven track record with their business, they don't feel qualified to access funding. So we uncovered this as kind of a gendered perception of qualification. And you see a similar thing happening in other areas. Research has shown this when women apply to jobs, right? They look at the job description, and if the job description asks for 10 qualities, women feel that they need to have all 10 qualities plus more in order to even apply for the job. Whereas men will see that same job description, feel that they confidently have 5 of those qualities and apply anyway. And so they're often, we see that women are oftentimes counting themselves out of opportunities. And this is really, we see this happening as well in terms of accessing financing. I talked to women who talked about, women entrepreneurs who talked about having binders full of their business plan and their financial records. And even then, they didn't feel confident enough to go and show that to a capital provider or a bank. So what needs to happen is this shift in mindset, this empowerment. We are preparing ourselves to a point of extreme qualification. And sometimes I think that we need to take the leap before we're ready. And so in terms of what needs to happen for recovery, there's lots of systemic things that we're bringing to attention in terms of, the financing pipeline. I also think it's a matter of a mindset. And it's also a matter of networking and being connected in organizations that can, bring greater clarity into what the pathway is for entrepreneurship or for whatever career path one chooses.
Yeah, I totally agree, totally. Also, your research also touched on the role of organization networks, as you just mentioned, in the business ecosystem. Could you share with us a bit more about organization networks have impacted Latino businesses, and whether there is a correlation between successfully leveraging organization networks and funding success?
Absolutely. So throughout the course of the pandemic, we have seen that business-serving organizations have been key in terms of distilling and synthesizing the ever-changing landscape of information as it relates to recovery efforts and what the latest federal regulations are. And so as business owners are trying to manage and keep their businesses alive, and then also, facing head on the other challenges that the pandemic has brought, organizations, again, have been really key. And in terms of the organizational effort at the SLE Education Scaling Program, this is a close-knit group. I talked about how there's over 720 alumni of that program, the mantra being do business with each other and get business for each other. And we saw that amongst this group of entrepreneurs who are very connected with each other, but also connected to the nonprofit organization, the Latino Business Action Network, their success rate of accessing relief aid was significantly higher than other groups. They had an over 80% success rate in accessing PPP funding. And that's because they were texting each other or on this, this organizing platform where they were sharing information at where the different lending institutions that were providing loans or grants. And so, being connected to organizations is in fact correlated to one's success. And I'll share a brief story here of an entrepreneur, a Latina who went through the SLE education scaling program, Maria Palacios. She's the CEO and co-founder of Progeny Coffee. And they service coffee that is grown by farmers of Colombia. And they provide it to a lot of the tech giants in Silicon Valley, the Facebooks, the Googles, et cetera. And when California administered the first stay-at-home order in March, her revenue decreased by 97% in a single day. And so she was, of course, devastated by this and reached out to her cohort of alumni of that program and shared her story with them. And a fellow member of the program reached out to her and provided her engineering team for her so that she can pivot her business. Her business model was largely B2B, business to business. And so now she needed to shift and go direct to consumer. She wanted to provide coffee to the employees of these big companies directly at home, which is where they were now working. And so this other entrepreneur provided her engineering team on a pro bono basis. They got up her page up and running for her to, administer or sell her coffee directly to consumers. And so that is one way that organizations, for instance, allow you to make these personal connections with others. Organizations that span across industry, right? She's in the coffee industry, and the woman who helped her, Monica Hernandez, she has a global consulting company in technology, and so they were able to make that connection. And so I think that we know that is absolutely key to your success, key to recovery of the pandemic, and of course, key to hearing about additional opportunities post-pandemic as well.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. What can society to do better to support Latinos and more broadly also other minority groups and persons of color, as well as do you have any advice maybe for corporations or just individuals, consumers, also as well as maybe some positive examples of efforts or initiative in the United States which you think are steps in the right direction to better support Latinos and other persons of color?
Yeah, so, Latinos and other minority groups are really best supported and served through concerted and collective efforts through public and private partnerships. And really, rather than waiting for this to happen, we're also, as many like to say, architects of our own solutions, and we're building our own supportive business ecosystems. But again, it really is going to take a series of organizations, both at the corporate level, at the government level, to see the real opportunity here with Latino business owners. In 2015, we conducted a thought experiment, and we saw, Latinos are a very entrepreneurial group, but what if we were to focus on supporting and the scaling and growth of the existing number of Latino businesses to generate on average what their white counterparts generate? And we found that there would be an additional $1.5 trillion added to the US economy if, in fact, we were to focus on scaling Latino businesses. So there's a huge opportunity there. And then in terms of advice for corporations, it's really to see that the viability of that opportunity. And, certainly Latinos are a large population, entrepreneurial, absolutely. And so, my advice to corporations would be to get ahead of these demographic changes. We see that in the United States, if we're not for Latinos and other immigrants starting businesses, there is decades long decline of entrepreneurship actually in the United States. And I think that's difficult for many to understand. We're based out of Silicon Valley, and so we see entrepreneurship everywhere. But it's still quite disparate across the board. But we're seeing this entrepreneurial dynamism being reinvigorated by Latinos in the United States. So there's a real opportunity here for corporations to support this segment. Part of our growth framework, we looked at what are some of the corollaries of success for Latino businesses. And it is in fact working with corporations and government through contracting and procurement opportunities. And so there's a real, again, a need there, a mutually beneficial support there for Latino business owners to obtain contracts at the corporate and government level, but also, on the corporate and government side, to make those opportunities more readily available. And so, we're starting to see some of this. I will say that there was here in Los Angeles, a local chain of a big chicken company wanted to support Latinas in the restaurant industry, and they started to provide. They provided over $100,000 in grants for Latinas, and they had this whole segment, this competition that brought a ton of attention, not only to their corporation, but also to the Latina restaurant owners in the Los Angeles area. And so it brings visibility not only to their own corporation, to the work that they're doing with communities, if in fact they're doing this in authentic ways. And so there's, again, a huge opportunity there. And it's a matter of corporations and government seeing the statistics, seeing what the quantified opportunity is, and also where the gaps are, so that those can be addressed as well.
Yeah, I do agree. As a generation change, it's also meant to be a more intimate conversation. Now, we also like to ask our speakers a few more personal questions, if you don't mind. Could you tell us more about your personal journey to where you are today? You mentioned a little bit at the beginning, and was this always what you are aspiring to do? What brought you down this path and made you choose to work with the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative?
Sure. So I would have never imagined I'd be doing research for a living. My parents are both immigrants from a small town in Jalisco, Mexico, and they have a 6th grade education. So they always push there's 4 of us, they always push their children to go on to obtain higher education. My brother was the first in my family to go to college. And, we were born and raised in Chicago, and he applied to Stanford University because his college advisor encouraged him to apply to places where there's good basketball teams. Growing up in Chicago, we always followed the Chicago Bulls. And so back then, Stanford was really great at basketball. And so his counselor encouraged him to apply there, and he did. And when he went off to college, we were excited for him because he was going to go far away to California and not bother us anymore. But really, he led the way for the rest of us. When it was my turn to apply to college, I thought that's what you did. You apply to Stanford, and I did, and I got in. And when I came, I recall driving down Palm Drive, which is a very scenic view entryway into Stanford University. And I thought, wow, I have to be here. I had never been to California. On that trip, I thought I was going to go to Disneyland, but geographically, Disneyland is not very close to Stanford. So I didn't make it out that weekend trip. But my journey really started at Stanford. And when I was there, I sought the support of professors who looked like me. There were not that many, but I got connected to my advisor, who is now actually my dissertation advisor. I'm finishing up my PhD at Stanford now. And he really encouraged me to go on to get a PhD. And I didn't even know what that was. I participated in a program, the Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship program, and it really planted the seed on thinking about research as a career path. And so, after college, I was a little bit reluctant. We talked about gendered perceptions of qualifications. I thought, am I really qualified to do research? Can I do this? Oftentimes folks, call this the imposter syndrome. Like I'm not really supposed to be here. And so I thought, I'm going to go on and try, a smaller graduate entry. I did a master's program. And then after that, I taught for a few years, but then I found my way back into higher education and ventured on this path towards research. Now, when I was at starting my PhD program, I was I wanted to do work with communities, not just study communities, but work with them. And so I, made sure that the research that I conducted is accessible and available to the communities with whom I work, so that, again, direct actions can be made, right? So this is the whole notion of having applicable or applied research. And I really found my home in schools like the School of Education and the Business School at Stanford. And so, the work at the business school that I've been doing, it really, again, has real world implications. Oftentimes, academics will conduct these research studies, write about it in journal articles, and then the three other people that will read them are other professors. But again, I really wanted my work to be accessible to wide audiences. And I'm really enjoying the work I'm doing at the business school. We create these annual State of Latino Entrepreneurship reports, which are industry reports, again, that are available. And our readers include policymakers and business leaders and researchers. We're really also crafting out the field of the study of minority entrepreneurship, which there is a lack of research on this topic. And so part of my work is also to bring together other researchers and academics who study Latino entrepreneurship. And last year, we released a volume, Advancing U.S. Latino Entrepreneurship, which has a series of chapters, one of which is on Latinas, that takes a deep dive into both the opportunities and challenges facing Latino business owners. So that's a little bit about my trajectory. Again, I would have never imagined to be doing research. That just was not a career path that I would have even known how to get there. But I'm very thankful that, again, it allows me to conduct research that with this skill set that I've gained at a rigorous level, and conduct research in an ethical way and a culturally appropriate way. And then, of course, give back to the communities who have shared their data with us.
I can imagine how your parents should be proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So as we discussed before, you're also CEO of Stratified Insight, a research consulting firm. And of course, so I'm sure that our listeners, they have also the same question. What is the next on the cards for your career path?
So I'm really exploring the avenues where my skill set will be optimized. I'm looking forward to continuing to grow my company. One of the reasons why I endeavored in starting Stratified Insights was, again, this need for organizations to have academic grade research, understand really the ins and outs of creating a research design that will answer the questions that one is set out for. And so, I hope to continue to grow that and conduct research with communities in partnership. I haven't shut off the possibility of becoming a professor. It was really important for me to get into this career path, to see others who looked like me. And there's not that many professors of color at the university level. And so if I could be that for somebody else, I would love to. And again, it's a lifestyle that it's flexible and the work that I enjoy doing. And in a way, you're an entrepreneur, right? You're creating your own outputs and generating your own research agenda. And so that is what I hope will be in the cards for me in the future.
Sounds amazing. So you also have a very accomplished background in education policy, and you were a teacher before you returned to graduate school. Is correct? Could you tell us a bit more about your research interest and work in the education policy field?
Right. So I was an elementary school teacher for a few years prior to returning to graduate school. And really, I took on that career path initially, again, because of the value that my parents had instilled in us in terms of what education can do to have generational shifts, right? So much of my work is looking at pathways of social mobility. And education is definitely a pathway for that. You know, in my family alone, you can see my parents with their 6th grade education, with 4 children who are, you know, lawyers, journalists, and business people. I mean, you know, it's pretty impressive to see that kind of shift in one generation, and then that was really afforded through education. And so I wanted to be a teacher. Because a lot of my work actually in education policy and management, which is what my master's degree is, you know, a lot of those studies on policy talked about, if you want to promote effective change in the education system, you need to do it through teachers. And so I wanted to be a teacher in that classroom. And it was by far one of the hardest things I've ever done. I taught 4th grade, and my last year I taught over 120 4th graders in a single classroom. They were trying, it was a charter school, and they were trying this disruptive model of learning in an open classroom space. And it was largely a failed exercise, but I learned so much in terms of the, you know, the followership that parents had, that community had in the leadership of teachers and the leaders of the organization. And so I was brought back to higher education to do my PhD program, to study the ways in which organizations make decisions like that. And some of my early research when I came back was around how to support you know, parents and informal caregivers, those who take care of children who are not in preschool or not in kindergarten yet. Oftentimes these are grandmothers or aunts or another family member who are taking care of your children. You know, childcare is a big issue in this country and certainly globally. And, you know, I wanted to study ways in which we can support this segment of the population that is not connected to a formal school system yet, because we oftentimes see that the gaps in learning and reading and math happen even before a child formally starts their schooling. A lot of this happens in those early 0 to 5 years of age. And so, you know, we created a text messaging program to support informal caregivers. And, you know, one of my research studies looked at the impact of that program and really designing the curriculum for the text messages. They got it 3 times a week, bite-sized pieces of information on how to support the child that they were taking care of in terms of developing their vocabulary and easy activities they can do throughout the day. And so that's some of my early work within the education space. Still something that I'm very passionate about, and will always be something that I'm also considering.
It's so amazing. You cannot imagine how I'm impressed, for real. What do you say that education and entrepreneurship are the keys to social mobility for disadvantages or minority groups? And also, what more needs to be done in these areas to try and ensure a more open and inclusive path to success for all?
That's right. So I'm a big proponent, and we've been talking about this throughout our conversation. I'm a big proponent of higher education. Again, I can see what it has done for my own family in terms of shifting, creating generational change that one can immediately see. But I also know that college is not for everybody. And so we need to think about how to have inclusive economies that provide pathways for mobility. And another pathway for mobility that we are seeing is through entrepreneurship. You know, several of the entrepreneurs that go through the education scaling program at Stanford, they're entrepreneurs who, you know, never went to college. And it is such a moving and fascinating thing for them to be in the same room with somebody who has an MBA. And together they're creating scaled businesses that are generating over $1 million in annual revenue. And there's so much that they can learn from each other. And so I absolutely think that entrepreneurship and education are pathways for mobility. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of, you know, continuing to provide the toolkit for entrepreneurs to scale their business, such as through this education program, or, you know, supporting other business serving organizations. I think one of the key things that we're seeing in this pandemic is, you know, nonprofits rely on philanthropic dollars. You're a nonprofit, you know this firsthand. And as we're thinking about where to spend our money, it's important to consider the organizations that support businesses and individuals in their career paths as well. I think they're absolutely key to the ecosystem. They play a critical role. We talked about the ways in which they synthesize and distill information. And so, these are ways in which that we can continue to bolster entrepreneurship and education as pathways for mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You've done so much things already. Of course, I have a question. How do you motivate yourself and you stay motivated? So do you have a personal motto of your life?
So, I love challenges and I love having my hand in working towards solving complex problems. That intrinsically motivates me. I think I would be hard pressed to just stay at home and not be challenging myself in a mental way. And I do have a couple of mottos that I abide by. I have them listed here, so I'm going to read them because it's helpful to kind of in your work environment to surround yourself. Some folks have vision boards, some folks pull their quotes. I have a couple of quotes that really motivate me every day. The first of which is, never assume your work speaks for itself. So I pride myself in my outputs, and I hope that my research does speak for itself. But oftentimes, managers and those who are evaluating your profile or your portfolio do not, they don't have the full breadth of everything that you bring to the table. So I document extensively all of my small wins, so that when it comes to having a talk about a promotion or an opportunity for a new project, I can immediately go to this long folder of documentation that I have, highlighting the things that I have accomplished, right? And I think oftentimes, we're humble and we don't want to kind of put out into the world, our accomplishments in fear of feeling like you're bragging. But I think that is absolutely necessary so that others that will follow you can see a model. And so that is one of the things that keeps me motivated, is ensuring that I'm keeping a track record of my small wins. And another thing that keeps me motivated, I also have a quote here by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who says, "The Latina in me is an ember that blazes forever." I think that we all have our unique backgrounds and perspectives that absolutely shape our work and our passion and our interests. And that is my lens in which I approach the work. And so that's another thing that motivates me. There's not that many, Latina PhDs in the world. It's growing, but to the extent that, again, my work and my background and my experience can serve as a model for others, I want to position that and so that others can see what is possible.
Exactly. What advice would you give to young women who are considering becoming entrepreneurs?
So I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I would absolutely say I would encourage women to take the leap of faith before you feel you're ready. It's absolutely scary, and oftentimes women are really great at assessing risk and will determine that they don't want to take those risks. And oftentimes it's a reality. People, are not always in a position to be able to take risks, such as entrepreneurship. I think that if you are confident in your skill set, in your product, in your service, then surround yourself with people who are supportive, who will provide you critical feedback. And with that, you will assess and determine whether when to take that leap. But I think that we would all do better if we decide to take that leap, perhaps a little bit before we think we're ready. Again, just because the research points to this notion of women having these gendered perceptions of qualifications, and we really can't wait it out too long. So I would encourage women to take that leap of faith, surround yourself with positive and supportive others, and again, others who will provide that constructive feedback, which is also a necessary component of our pathways.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Just perfect. Just perfect. So, we have started receiving some audience questions. And let's, as we always promising to go through, so let's have a look then. So First question, how is Latino entrepreneurship represented in the United States?
That's a really great question. So, our research initiative was created in 2015. One of the great visionaries of our work is Jerry Porras. You might know him. He's the co-author of Built to Last. And his vision of change, his theory of change is really to generate wealth within the Latino community through business ownership. And this question on how is Latino entrepreneurship represented in the US, I think we're making some headways. Our work tries to really connect and engage with media outlets to have wide reach in terms of consumers of our work. We don't want to just keep it in that bubble of, Latinos talking to other Latinos. It's important for others to see the contributions that Latinos make. And then certainly at the government, as it relates to the government, we talked about the pathways of the corollaries of growth and through procurement with government and corporations. There's still much work that needs to be done there. And I think, again, I hope that the work at our initiative is really bringing to light both the opportunities and then, of course, the challenges ahead for Latino businesses.
Thanks. Next question. Are there any signs of changes in healthcare policies considered by businesses in COVID-19 impact?
Yeah, that's a really great question as well. I will say that, before, in one of our reports this past year, we created an index of overall well-being and financial well-being. And there were three components that we considered. We considered income, home ownership, and healthcare. And, Latino entrepreneurs lag in healthcare compared to their wage working counterparts, but surpass them in home ownership and income. And so this whole notion of healthcare is an important one to consider. And certainly as entrepreneurs think about benefits to provide for their employees, if healthcare, for instance, continues to be a costly expense, that's something that could be detracting from would-be entrepreneurs in starting businesses. And in fact, there has been some research that shows that if barriers reduce as a way to reduce barriers of entry, having accessible and affordable healthcare is one way that would actually encourage more entrepreneurship. I will say that from the employee side of entrepreneurs, early in the pandemic, there were huge expenses that were incurred to ensure safe work environments. For those who were shifting to a work from home environment, there was a huge investment now in terms of upgrading technologies and equipping everybody with the materials that they needed to be able to adequately work from home. And then, of course, with the whole the PPE protective equipment, those were came at a cost as well, especially when it was hard to come by early in the pandemic. And so these are costs that entrepreneurs have to continue to fold in as we endure in the pandemic, which I think was part of the question.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Marlene. Next question, how current president is positioned versus previous administration?
So I'm going to interpret from this question the support of the small business community. And one of the things I will say is, we're a nonpartisan research initiative, but I will say that there is much work at the Small Business Administration now and previously as well, in terms of thinking about ways in which to support small businesses in the United States. They really are the backbone of our economy. Oftentimes we think about these big giant corporations, Facebook and Google, and they certainly employ a lot of people, but there are lots of people also employed by these small and local businesses. And so, again, there's efforts, within the Small Business Administration to really streamline programming and also resources and relief aid. So there's that's something that we'll continue to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, thanks. We have another great question. Is venture market difficult for Latinos as normal banking, or is there more open-minded?
Yeah, it's a really great question, actually. We recently worked with Crunchbase to release a diversity report on the amount of venture capital that is being deployed to Latino and Black entrepreneurs, and it is minuscule. 1 to 2% of all venture dollars are going to Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. So, I will say on an individual case basis, there is opportunity to be open-minded and think about more inputs of the business on a holistic way than the criteria that some bankers might be using. Through the advent of the credit score, this is one way, for instance, that banks are making decisions in a very quantifiable way. It helps with shifting through and making decisions perhaps quickly, but does it tell you the whole story of the business or the business owner? Probably not. And so I think that there's lots of potential for venture capital to support Latino businesses. There's also lots of potential and opportunity for venture capital markets to be diversified themselves, right? So if otherwise, we'll continue to see some of the small funding amounts being deployed, right? I think oftentimes, and the research has shown this, that venture capitalists like to fund founders that have some sort of shared background or commonality with them. And so if they're, venture capitalists don't have qualities that are diverse in nature, that could be that is a challenge. And so there's certainly opportunities within the venture space.
Perfect. Another question, how is the penetration of Latino entrepreneurs in tech business? Are they communities or alliances?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we're seeing the increase of Latino businesses in the tech industry. I think oftentimes there might be this misconception that Latino businesses are, by virtue, mom and pop shops or solely in the service sector or singularly restaurants, and Latinos over-index in all of those spaces, but we're seeing an increase in the tech space. We know that Latinos over-index on social media and smartphone usage, and so these are real markets to tap into, not only Latino consumers, but of course Latino businesses to leverage these platforms for the purposes of growing and scaling their own company. And so there's a lot of potential within the tech space. I think one of the things that the pandemic has also done is it's sped up this need to digitize our workflow, within as businesses and consumers of this content as well.
Yeah, I agree. So another great question: how is the penetration of Latino? Oh, I just read it for you. Okay, next one. Audience comment, no question. Yes, Maria Palacio is amazing. So we have fans also with us today. So let's move to another question. Imposter syndrome is such a real challenge for so many women. Any tips on how to overcome this? Thanks for the analysis, insight, and some very stark statistics.
I think I'm not going to say that imposter syndrome is something that magically disappears, like you become, the CEO, and I'm sure CEOs also still feel imposter syndrome. Some ways to overcome it, or at least diminish the impacts and the potential debilitating impacts of imposter syndrome, is to, as I mentioned previously, to really keep track of your small wins, right? If your product or your work was featured in a company newsletter, for instance, save that, screenshot it, put it in a folder, save it. Think about the ways in which you can also be your own voice and your own champion, right? So again, think about how you can market and product the things that you are doing. Goes back to my quote that I live by: never assume your work speaks for itself. I think we all value our work and ensuring that we're doing a good job. And so sometimes that's not enough. What we see as a good job, others might not view it as such. And so make the case for yourself. The way that you can also mitigate the impacts of imposter syndrome. I think one of the natural ways that we do that is by getting all the credentials possible, right? And so, but do that, but do it because it provides you a skill set, not because you think you need to get that credential, right? So if you're, for instance, making the decision on whether you should go get an MBA, think about what your ideal career or goal is and do some backwards planning. Is an MBA the right way to get there? Can you get there some other way? And so there are some ways in which you can ward off the impacts or the effects of the imposter syndrome. One other way I will say is by surrounding yourself again with an affirming and positive community. And that is absolutely key to uplift each other. Try to do that yourself as well. Compliment somebody. If you really like their article or you think that they did a really good job leading a team meeting, send them a quick email. It's these little things that I think will make an impact in terms of bolstering collectively our confidence as women and as leaders.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Absolutely, absolutely. And we logically direct another question from our audience. What can be done for young girls in junior school to give them confidence about the future, to teach them what they can achieve?
That's a really great question. And I think this socializing absolutely happens as young girls and young children. There's this great researcher, Jennifer Lawless, who looks at the reasons why women don't run for political office. And some of this happens, again, the ways in which women are young girls are socialized. They're not encouraged to do sports, and so doing more of that and affirming girls, not just for their looks or their beauty, but for their courageousness, for their for being brave, for the ways in which we tend to characterize our male leaders. Use that language with our girls as well, and then also being role models for them, and again showing what is possible. The way that we change the narrative is by seeing that in our leaders, and so direct them and guide them towards positive role models in a very early age. And then again, positive affirmations are really key and critical here in terms of socializing young girls to be leaders. The work of Jennifer Lawless, again, talks about the difference in language, the similar quality of a male CEO as strong and a leader is oftentimes seen in a negative light for a woman. And so how then do we equate these? And we show that they are similar is by breaking down those false narratives that they are dissimilar when in reality, these are qualities that we want in all of our leaders.
Yeah, exactly. So from your point of view, how important is to find the right mentor, and how do you think the right mentor should act?
I think mentorship is a key part of this, and part of the work that we do in the education scaling program is by assigning mentors directly. Oftentimes it's hard to ask for help or to be in a vulnerable position to say that you need help. And so, having organizations or systems and structures in place that facilitate mentorship, I think are really key. But if you're in a position where you're not tapped into a network or an organization that is assigning you a mentor, for instance, then, seek those mentors out for yourself. And part of this is, having the models or the exemplars of people who we want to be like, or who, whose careers or aspirations we may have, and then making those connections. You want to, of course, be genuine in those mentorship relationships. It is a reciprocal thing, right? It's not the mentor has all of the answers and expertise and the mentee, is singularly learning. It is a mutually beneficial relationship. And so I would encourage individuals to seek out mentors if in fact they're not part of a formal organization, but it is absolutely key to have a mentor to enter the spaces that we would like to be in.
Absolutely. And it's so important to have a very good relationship in between, because I do agree that it's a journey for both of them, for mentee and for mentor as well. So next great, quite a long question in a way. The female entrepreneur that realized her strengths decided to take change of her life, needs and advice, and the community that will support her. Where do you think the women could find the peers, women like you, that will help you advance to the next level? And there any organization in the US that provide women career advice in order to achieve your ambitions?
I think that's a really great question. And it depends on what your career trajectory is, right? So for instance, if you're a business owner, there's trade associations that are specific to your industry that you can tap into. There are certainly a ton of organizations, and I'm happy to answer these questions offline, right? There's organizations that support women who have aspirations, political aspirations, and simply just do not know how to get there. So there's training programs for how then to run for office. So there's a ton of programs. It would have to be contingent on the, one's particular career and desire, but I would wholeheartedly encourage you to seek them out, simple Google search, or, email somebody who you think might have some ideas, but they are absolutely critical to your support.
Thanks a lot. Another great question. Great topic and insights. Any women leaders that inspire you, or any good books you have read recently and recommend?
It's a really great question. So I am inspired by Justice Ginsburg. She recently passed away, but there was a wonderful movie about her story and the ways in which she fought for gender equality in the United States. It's still a fight that we are having today, but nonetheless, she laid some important legal groundwork for us. And so her story fascinates me. And the fact that she was doing her work till the very end is also very inspiring to me. That speaks to kind of her love and devotion for her career. And so I find that very inspiring. Any good books that you've read recently or recommend? This is a really good one. I read a lot of academic books, so they may or may not be of interest to you all. I think this book is a great one, Advancing US Latino Entrepreneurship. Another one that we talked about earlier was Built to Last by Jerry Porras. That one, he co-authored by him. That book's been translated in, over 25 languages, and it really talks about how to build a visionary company. And so I would encourage that for, even if you're not an entrepreneur yourself, I think it's a really good mindset to have, whatever your career may be.
Yeah, another good question. How much do you think you sacrificed of your personal life achieving your career goals?
For me, and this phrase is used a lot, but work-life balance is key. Balancing work and a PhD and running after a toddler and conducting projects through my firm. It's a lot to manage, but I place the needs of my family above and beyond that. And when I need help, I ask for it. So there are some weekends, for instance, when I do have to work. I try to keep weekends as sacred family time. But when I do need to work, I vocalize what I need. And so communication is key there in terms of being able to achieve one's career goals. And we're doing it together. And so it's certainly a lot to balance, but when you find joy in the things that you are balancing, that's also kind of another way to do it.
So sweet. We have a so good question. Another one. How would you like to be the world? How would you like to be the world for your kids? Make a wish.
It's a really good one. So my daughter she's going to be 2 next month. And what I wish for her and what I hope for her is a world in which she can really be anything that she wants, right? So, there are lots of gendered industries, for instance. I love speaking to women entrepreneurs who are in the construction industry or the waste management industry. I mean, that's fascinating to me. They're breaking down barriers, but they're still one of very few. And so I would love kind of greater representation across the board so that she can see that whatever her passions may be, a career is achievable in that. And so that is what I wish for her and what I wish for others as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks for your vision. I hope it will be true. So we have last great question for this session. If you had 100 million to donate, how would you split between help, teach, grow, invest? Thanks.
Very, very good. Right. So this is great. Those are all kind of good adjectives. I would split it rather evenly because I think it's important to teach and important to invest. I would certainly, think critically about the organizations or the avenues where I am donating, right? I want similarly the investment dollars to have an impact. And so I would be, as a researcher, I would be really critical about what their outcomes are as an organization so that, again, I can ensure that what I am donating has far-reaching and lasting impacts. And so I would want to know what their theories of change are and how they're evaluating impact so that I can support that with financial dollars, which of course are key to the equation. And so I would definitely do my research before I would invest that huge amount of $100 million.
Thanks a lot for just an amazing answers. And thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today, Marlene. This was really, really a very insightful and interesting conversation. And I'm so inspired every time to see young women like you who represent the new generation of female leaders who are changing the world for the better. And thanks to everyone who tuned in, whether you are watching us live or catching up via the replies. I hope that all of you found the session as inspiring, as insightful as I did. Because all Generation Change session recordings are available to view at your complete convenience on our website, www.generationfemale.net. And you can also sign up to join our community mailing list via our website so that you can get notified of all our events and activities. We are Generation Female, and thank you for joining us. Thanks a lot, Marlene. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a very good Friday and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye.